Hi, EJ.
Good morning, Sarah.
How are you?
I'm terrific. How are you?
Good. So we are going to talk today about Anne-Marie Slaughter's cover story in The Atlantic, which generated possibly more discussion online than the impending healthcare decision from the Supreme Court.
Among a little subsector.
That's true. That's true. It was a subsector of people, commentators writing about it.
But they did say, The Atlantic did say it got more hits than anything else they've ever posted.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Fascinating. Well, that was probably the intention, right? To
Yes.
get a lot of people to read it and talk about it. Because every
Yes.
magazine loves for people to read and talk about their pieces. I mean, that's the whole point, to create buzz. But the question here to me is whether the framing of the piece and the headline and just sort of the whole setup, the whole way The Atlantic set it up, was actually different from what Slaughter was intending to do.
Yes, I had a little exchange on Twitter, obviously very deep and profound, exchange with Scott Stossel, who I imagine edited that piece about it. And the headline that the Prospect gave to my response piece,
right, which was excellent, by the way, everyone should read it,
was Why Does the Atlantic Hate Women?
Yes.
And I wouldn't have given it that. But, I looked at that headline and I thought, okay, I'll never write for the Atlantic, that's fun.
No, that's it might be cause for you to write for the Atlantic.
Well, what I was going to say is that I understood why they would give it that title, right? That's going to get a lot of readership. And clearly, one of the things that Scott Stossel says was, I understand what you're saying about when he twatted, whatever it was he said. When he tweeted at me was, I have conceded your point about the framing. Framing, and of course my point was that the framing was incredibly offensive. The headline was Why Women Can't Have It All.
Why they still can't have it all.
Why women still can't have it all. The picture was a baby in a briefcase, which is such a tired genre.
Yes, it's very 1980s.
Oh my God, we're so past that. And so it was set up as, here, you feminists, you're failing yet again.
Right.
What you wanted was, if you're trying to get that, you failed, and feminism is here to make your babies and you miserable. So that's the frame, and as you say, that's not what Slaughter clearly is doing in the piece. But he tweeted back at me, but I contend that we wouldn't have gotten nearly the readership if we had framed it differently. And you have to say, well, possibly, but still, the framing still set the serious conversation back at least a tiny bit.
Well, I think that people talked more about the framing than the actual piece itself.
I think it varied.
Yeah.
It depends which people you're talking about.
Well, can I just read, because I thought your post was great, and that's why I wanted to talk about it with you. I just wanted to read a bit from your post. You said, once again, The Atlantic has put on its spike heels to gleefully dance on feminism's head, this time reviving the imagery of the mommy wars, quote, in scare quotes, while trotting out an astounding, successful woman to bemoan her failure. And clearly, obviously, Anne-Marie Slaughter is not a failure, right?
She's not a failure.
You're clearly saying that. Veteran journalist Carol Rivers has accurately diagnosed this as the Atlantic's woman problem. Someone there doesn't like us, except when we're agonizingly single, or home with our babies, or killing off men's careers. Someone there got stuck on some 1980s Time magazine misinterpretation of feminism as exhorting us all to be career women. Does anyone really use that term? In shoulder pads and sad little bow ties, leaving our babies home alone, refrigerator open, to fend for themselves while we try to have it all and reach the top.
I actually, our family just saw Home Alone recently. That's exactly the image, that the child is left home. I mean, she has the sad little shoulder paddy 1980s looking.
Well, there was also, I can't remember who it was it Rebecca Tracer's piece talked about the Diane Keaton movie from the 80s?
Oh, that was the real horror. Yeah, that was terrible.
Right.
And of course, Jessica Valenti had that spectacular Tumblr of all the sad white babies with mean feminist mommies.
Right.
It was a great set of images. Okay, so the framing is bad. I'll just, no, I have a terrible tendency to defend those I attack, or disagree with, let me say it. Disagree with. So Scott also tweeted back at me that, in fact, they've done some other wonderful, he didn't use the word feminist, but thoughtful pieces, because I gave him a whole list of people. Why aren't you running these people? Why are you running Caitlin Flanagan and, other people that we have had trouble with over time? And I said, why not Karen Kornblue? I mean, I gave a number, but that was one. And so Karen Kornblue then tweeted at me, here's the piece that Scott edited that did run in The Atlantic in 2003. So,
but that was almost 10 years ago.
It was.
Yeah.
It was 10 years ago. Just saying, they have, and I just looked at it. It's a piece worth reading. I did tweet it out, but
okay.
I should call attention to it.
Okay. Well, we'll put a link up. Yeah, so I think that I don't know. I mean, I doubt that the Atlantic editors said, like, let's do something that will be, very, that our intention is to be anti-feminist. I think that their intention was obviously to get a lot of hits and get a lot of people talking about it. And I think that it did a disservice to Slaughter's piece. I mean, I think Slaughter's piece, so
let's talk about the piece.
Yeah, let's talk about the piece itself, because it was, so there was the framing that got a lot of criticism, and then there was the piece itself. Now, for people who haven't read it, it's quite lengthy and worth reading.
Worth reading.
But, so Slaughter is probably one of the country's foremost, foreign policy experts. And she teaches at Princeton, and she served in under Hillary Clinton.
Teach at Princeton. She is a named chair and former dean.
Right.
Yes.
And she served for 2 years, was it, under Hillary Clinton at the State Department.
Right.
And it was during that time when, the rest of her family was living in Princeton still, and she was essentially living in Washington and working at probably one of the most demanding, relentless sorts of jobs that you can have in Washington, that very few people last out longer than a couple of years.
Right.
Just because, to me, as I was reading it, of course, I live in Washington. I know a lot of people who work insane hours, and I've lived in Washington for a long time, and I've never wanted to be one of those people who worked insane hours. That was true when I was single, and it was true when I was married, and it was true when I was a parent. It was like all of these things. To me, it's about, do you want to give your life over to this job, which is obviously very important.
You think of those jobs. When I hear people in those jobs, I think of those gates around the White House as holding them in, as opposed to holding other people out.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And I don't know. Do you watch Veep? On HBO.
I haven't watched Veep, no.
So the Julia Louis-Dreyfus character, she's the vice president of the United States, and her press secretary. There's a storyline where her press secretary makes up the fact that he has a dog. It says, just so he can get home. He says, I have to go walk the dog. Which is kind of hilarious, because of course anyone in that position who did have a dog would have a dog walker. But then it turns out that he was just making it all up so he could, get out of work at a sane hour. But, so to me it's more about, that was the struggle that she faced was less about whether a woman could have it all or not, a career woman could have it all, because as Lindsay Bearstein points out in her blog, Anne-Marie Slaughter does have it all. She's had an incredibly successful career and a family, and how is that not having it all?
And the husband, who's outstandingly
supportive,
an equal partner.
Right.
I don't even want to say supportive, because that seems as if he's making an indulgence for her,
or making a sacrifice for her.
Exactly. He's a full and equal partner. Okay, it's your turn. You do this. Right.
Right.
Which is so yes, it is fabulous. But you know what? We're still on the framing, and there is something wrong with that framing. Mm-hmm. She does have it all, etc. But I think what she got at was very true, which is that most people, she's academic royalty, right? There's academics do not understand, for the most part, how most of us live. Most people, as she said, when she got in a regular job where she had to live, I understand you're saying it's not a regular job. It's a 24-hour-a-day job running the most powerful country in the world, and they don't let you out ever. When she got a job where she had to work on somebody else's schedule, according to somebody else's demands, and was not able to run her day in a way that worked for herself and her family, she couldn't be the superstar that she had been over at Princeton. Right? She doesn't say she was a superstar, but I'm paraphrasing. And at that point,
you don't think she was a superstar at the State Department?
Pardon me?
You don't think she was a superstar at the State Department?
Okay, just to finish my thought,
Okay.
Academic royalty, the people in those incredible top-level academic jobs have a kind of freedom to set up the structure of their lives that most people with paying salaried jobs do not have.
Right.
And she got that. She got it. That's what she was saying. I get it. I get it that you cannot do everything. You cannot have this high-flying career and be a human being with a family. And there's something wrong with the structure of a work world that makes that impossible.
Mm-hmm.
So what?
And I think if you're a man or a woman or a parent or not a parent or married or living together, whatever your setup is, I would think that it would be incredibly hard. It would be incredibly hard if you were single because you wouldn't have a social life. Can you imagine how it would be lonely and
well, that's for the White House job.
Isolating.
But I think what she did that was incredibly useful, and not just White House job, but
the State Department job.
High-end U.S. policymaker job.
Right.
Yes, those people have to decide to sacrifice everything else if they're going to stay there for very long. But I think what the piece did that was nuanced and thoughtful and does a service to the rest of us, right? Yes, her situation is extraordinary, but does a service to the rest of us is point out that the structure of the American workplace has completely gone off the rails, right? There was Sarah Robinson.
But is her workplace comparable to other people's workplace?
Hers is extraordinary, but I'll tell you, when I had a full-time job, I was losing my mind. Right? To have to leave the house at 7:30 in the morning and get back to the house, you stay at work until your work is done, which is what, 6:30, 7. You can't go to anything at your child's school. You can't get there. A workplace that has a professional salary that lets you support a child in a middle to upper middle class, that professional job, it's impossible. Even if they're family friendly and flexible and say, yes, you can go home at 3 o'clock, they're still going to expect you to be in constant email touch all over the weekend, or that you're going to be back at your desk and responding to email in a serious and intense way at 6:30 or 7 or 8. And not all of them will let you out at 6:30 in order to get home and have dinner with your family. Even if you can get dinner with your family, then who's making that dinner? And the school system, the school schedule is a mismatch with the work system.
Oh yeah, definitely.
At such an absurd level that one of the partners has to be home in order to...
Or you have to have a caregiver.
Or you have to have full-time caregiver.
Your kids get home from school. So you were saying about just the crazy work schedule issue.
Yes, work and school right now, as she points out, are set up in absurd, non-intersecting ways. We still have a school system whose schedule is based on the old agricultural system. So the kids get out at 3 o'clock to milk the cows, and right? and then they get home in time and stay home all summer so they can help you plant and then bring in the crops. Meanwhile, I give a talk about this, and I have this picture in one corner of the slide of a child milking a cow, and a picture over in another corner of the slide of a guy in a cubicle with his hands in the air, like ready to cry, because managers know that between like 3 and 4, boom, there goes their productivity. All their employees are on the phone making sure the kids got home safely. right?
But do you also have a slide of the kid playing a video game?
Well, we only hope that the kid is playing a video game. But
but that's no good for their brains.
Yeah, well, it's better for their brains than them. We don't have to go into what else they could be.
Right.
At least then they're home, right? But yes, and of course we all know about keeping the children entertained by saying, yes, the Xbox can't be bad for you 12 hours a day. But that's a separate issue. But so there's that. You have to get them there at an absurd hour of the morning, and you have to pick them up right in the middle of your workday. And there's no... okay, so that's one thing. Next thing is you have a huge sector of the American workforce, 50%, I believe, that has no paid sick leave, right? So the people with no paid sick leave are the people who really cannot afford to take a day off. They're waitresses, they're the lowest level retail clerks. They're working at minimum wage, and they can't afford to take a day if their kid gets sick, much less if they get sick. So,
well, okay, so these issues that you're bringing up, as well as the issues that Slaughter brings up in her piece,
yes,
none of these issues have anything to do with the failures of feminism.
And that's why the framing is different from the article. Now I'm trying to talk about the article.
Mm-hmm.
She is talking in that article about what is wrong with the structure of the American workplace and the structure of the American educational and child-rearing system that do not match.
Mm-hmm. Now, you were a few minutes ago about to bring up some work that Sarah Robinson had done on this issue.
Yes. So she has a really wonderful article that somewhere in the past few months that is called What Happened to the 40-Hour Work Week, or Bring Back the 40-Hour Work Week. Once upon a time, not that long ago, 50 years ago, people worked 40 hours. Low end, high end. I don't know about you, but my father in the 60s got home every day at 5:30. Every day. Got home at 5:30. I don't know anybody except people in government jobs, maybe. State government jobs, not, State Department jobs, who can get home at 5:30. And yet, this, back to the school system thing, they're still having their school events at 5 o'clock.
Well, let's start with the school issue.
Yeah.
I know that in some areas there has been a move, and in some cases a successful move, to make school year-round, so that there is no summer vacation, but there's vacation around times where extended families might be otherwise getting together. Yeah. So, but I know that a lot of people love it, because then they don't have to worry about what am I going to do with my kids all summer while I'm at work.
Also, you don't have the summer slide that teachers worry about so much, right?
Right.
They spend the whole first 2 months of a school year reteaching what the previous year had taught.
Right. And then for parents who can't afford to put their kids in summer camp so that they can work, it's if they can go to public school over the summer months, that solves this huge problem for these parents.
Right.
Now, on the flip side of that, there are people who say it would be a travesty to lose summer vacation, that there's this nostalgia associated with summer vacation where kids roam freely and play capture the flag with their friends in the neighborhood or whatever.
Do you know how many kids who still do that?
Well, that's because the reason why is nobody.
Now.
Right, nobody does that because everybody is scheduled in camp. So there are no spontaneous capture the flag.
No. Let's think about when the nostalgia that most people that we know have for that period. They're thinking back to a time during the 1950s, 1960s, maybe the early 1970s.
I would say the 1970s. My childhood.
Okay, 1970s, which is a very particular time when I'm thinking how to characterize it. I'll talk 1950s and 1960s because this is when it got set up, and it was a very temporary social structure. Suddenly, the United States was the sole economic power really on the planet. And what the United States was doing was investing in shipping white middle class out of the cities. So they put in the GI Bill. So a vast number of men could afford to go to colleges and buy their first houses. And the federal highway system was being built. So all of a sudden, you have these vast developments of suburbs, commuter suburbs, where groups of families in the same age band were all living, as opposed to multi-generational towns and cities. And for those, 15, 20 years, when everybody who moved in there was essentially the same age, they all had kids together, that was a very bizarre period. We think of it as forever.
I mean, historically speaking, it was
culturally,
not
it
like,
was odd.
right.
So everybody in your neighborhood had kids in the same age band. It was
That is exactly the neighborhood I grew up in.
Pardon me?
That's exactly the neighborhood I grew up in.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone on our block had kids, in the same age range.
And the mothers were at home. Right? That's never coming back. That was 25, 30 years. And that's oh my God, we just had the biggest lightning and thunder I've ever heard.
Oh, really?
Oh my God, I'm sorry.
I heard it. I can hear it, yeah. Hopefully you won't lose power.
Yes, hopefully we won't lose power. So
that was an unusual time in our history, but we've nostalgized
unprecedented, and it's not going to return. Right? So you could run out in the street because
we see that as the salad days. I think it's it's an iconic time that we all harken back to, that this was the perfect time for our children.
And yes, but it's not coming back. So there's just not going to be another period, at least in our lifetimes, when a single person can support an entire family. It hadn't happened before, and it's not going to happen again. We can talk about...
Okay.
But just to talk about
there's an upper echelon of income earners.
I'm talking about most people. That's always been true for the elite and for the extremely poor. But for the vast majority of people... But I want to talk about that, like running around in the streets, like with your buddies. Mm-hmm. That's also not coming back. Because then you had this whole generation of women who weren't working. Even if that mother was not watching that child, the entire neighborhood of mothers was available to make sure, to look out the window and see that the children weren't dead somewhere. And the kids were home. They were all home. Now they're not. Now the neighborhoods do not have kids who are all the same range of ages. They don't have as many kids, right? The baby boom was a boom. We had American women had more children, and they had them younger than had been happening for 150 years. The birth rate had been dropping, and the age of first childbirth was later than it was during the 1950s. Anyway, so it was an extraordinary period, and as you say, it's iconic and it's in the cultural memory. I mean, it's rerun on Nick at Night, but it happened because from now on, we are going to have all adults in the household helping to support the family, and as we do now, that's going to continue. Right now, 80% of children growing up are growing up in families where all adults are in the workforce.
So why do you think the resistance to the year-round school persists, even though everybody knows that? For most people, this iconic vision of what summer is like for kids no longer exists.
I haven't looked into the educational research, so I don't know. Mm-hmm. I don't know whether it is right for kids to have some large gap in the middle. Mm-hmm. What I'm saying is it hasn't been the mismatch of adult life and educational life has not been rethought. The adult workforce expectations have expanded absurdly. And school hasn't been, and the way we deal with children hasn't been changed to
The
adapt.
school schedule hasn't been changed
Right,
at all,
right.
but everybody's work schedule has been changed dramatically.
Expanded dramatically.
Right.
And the numbers
But
of us
then-
in the workforce have expanded dramatically.
Right. But then on the other hand, I mean, I think that I'm thinking of, because I live in, like I said, I live in Washington, and I know a lot of people who work as consultants, so they work out of a home office, and they've managed to adapt their schedule in that way. I mean, they may still be working 50 hours a week, but they're doing it kind of on their own time. So, like, if they want to go run over to school from 4 to 6 o'clock and see the play or the soccer game or whatever it is, they do that. But then, of course, they're back at their desk at 9 o'clock working. So, people
adapt.
People have made their adaptations to it, but I don't think that our workforce, broadly speaking, has made an adaptation in the sense that where people are expected to work fewer hours, which I think is probably Robinson's point in her piece.
Yes.
But
I agree. That's the problem. I mean, people keep making individual adaptations, and sure, that's always going to have to happen. I mean, everybody's family is individual, but right now the setup is such that everybody has to figure out their own individual adaptation, and that's especially hard on those at the bottom.
Yes. So, Slaughter's piece, now...
To get back to that.
Of course, yeah. She has she had, when she worked at the State Department, the most unusual of job expectations. I mean, very few people are expected to, she was shaping U.S. foreign policy, right? I mean, there aren't that many people whose job is demanding in that way. I think it's a sort of, that sort of Washington job is the special case in the sense that it's thought that, well, you can't leave, of course, you can't work fewer than 60 hours or 80 hours or whatever it is a week, because, the world would collapse, or, and whether that's true or not, I do think that there's some element of over expecting, from even those people. But that's like such an unusual sort of job to have, or position to be in. It's sort of a Washington creature, and New York has its own creature, the Wall Street creature, which also has ridiculously high expectations for putting in work hours, or the law firm, for example, the billable hours.
But you know what, you're adding up a lot of them, right? There's also, you can also go to Silicon Valley. You can go to the banking. You can go to Wall Street, and sure, that's a very narrow band of the elite workforce, but there's a lot of them, and then their expectations. The expansion expectations. What Sarah calls it is the speed up. We've all been that's Mother Jones. We've all been put into the speed up. I don't know any journalist who works a 40-hour week, right? Every industry that's been in recession, the salaried workers are expected to be working all the time. Pretty much, if your job is meaningful, you're expected to work all the time, unless you have.
Well, and also because of this, I'm holding up, all these devices that are going to connect us all the time.
And because of the devices, right, we're on leash all the time. I remember when they first started the spread, and I looked at people and I thought, you're willingly purchasing your electronic leash. I mean, we're never on, we're always on. And I'm not saying I know how to
reel it back
so that we expect to have human and work and family lives, but I am grateful to Slaughter for bringing it up.
Well, I think she was talking much more about, something that her piece didn't address as much, or like the focus of it wasn't. I mean, the focus of it was more about this work life that I think affects both, it affects everyone. It's not like it affects mothers more than fathers, or, people who are in couples more than single people.
Right. Or sons and daughters.
Right. It's like it's just a crazy way to work. in general.
Yes.
But then there's this other issue, which, you sort of think that maybe the article is going to get at, and that is, why aren't there more women in, the upper echelons of politics or, CEOs? And she talks about this. She talks about the woman whose name I can't remember right now.
Sheryl Sandberg.
With Facebook, right.
Yes.
So, and that's like a whole other issue that is not, it's part and parcel of the whole work culture, but I think that the crazy work schedule culture affects everybody equally and is not, so it's sort of a different question. Why aren't more women, in Congress, in the upper echelons of policymaking, in the upper echelons of business or Wall Street or banking or management of Fortune 500 companies? And that's like a whole other ball of wax. I felt like when I read Slaughter's piece, it was sort of like, it's like all of these things together. And, and I think that a lot of the responses to it tried to tease out these different elements of it. I think Bryce Covert had a piece at The Nation about that. And
structural discrimination. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. What you're saying is that the clash between the always-on work culture and having a family life, and the clash between the way our post-industrial work world is set up and the way our educational system is set up, those are structural things that cause problems for women and men, and they are usually specifically, or let me put it differently, far too often, and this was the Atlantic's framing problem, far too often identified as a woman's problem, as if it were a choice for women to work or not work, and it's not a choice for men to work or not work. Everyone's working. Everyone has to work now.
Right. And so the problem when you can't get to your kids, or you can't get to your kids' play, or you can't get to their softball game. Yeah, right. It's like what, and it's the having it all framing, which is sort of like, well, why don't we ever talk about
We never
men?
want to see the have it all word again. Rebecca Traister wrote a wonderful piece about that.
Yes, she did. Yes.
We never want.
She absolutely did.
What is this
is not it yet. Right.
Yeah. I got a great, somebody tweeted at me a wonderful thing that, let's see, dear human beings, you will never have it all. Love God. No URL.
Right.
So that's not just a feminist. That's just, there's limits in a day. Okay, so those things are true. And now you're saying there's also sex discrimination. There's also structural discrimination against women rising. Women are expected, and there's research to go with this, as you know, are expected to prove themselves, whereas men are promoted on promise. Women have to prove themselves over and over in each position. This isn't universal, but it is. It happens more with women than it happens with men. Men move ahead faster. There's the concept of the social that the sociologists or social psychologists have come up with of the glass escalator. Men go into a woman's profession, or a woman's occupation, I should say, and they are promoted faster than the women are. Right? They get ahead faster, and they make more money on average than women do as whatever it is, nurses, secretaries, childcare people. There are also these other structures of moving men forward faster than women get moved ahead.
Mm-hmm. And it seems to me that, one of the questions that should be asked is, why can't women have it all? Well, they can't have it all because they don't have the same workplace equity with men. They don't make the same wages. They don't have the same promotion as men do. And that's why they don't have it all. I mean, it's not because it's like somehow inherently impossible.
Because you have eggs.
Because you have
as opposed
eggs.
to sperm.
Right. And so it's sort of like when people ask that question, it's sort of like, I don't even know what to say, because it always strikes me as, what does that mean? Like it's so, like you said, like we were saying at the beginning, it's this antiquated idea that it's somehow novel that a mother also has
my gosh,
a
women in
job.
the workplace,
I didn't know
abandoning their children. Yes, leaving them to eat out of the refrigerator all by themselves when they're only 6 months old. Yes.
Right. It was
For
interesting,
selfish reasons, for personal advancement. Yes.
Right.
Instead of, oh my God, if we're going to afford to live in a school system that is going to actually educate you, I have to have a job. Yeah. And also that it's a woman's problem. So let's put aside the have it all frame. I mean, I think we've rejected that. They were wrong. They shouldn't do it. Rebecca Traisker is right. It should be forever retired.
But it won't be. But anyway, go ahead.
I don't know. I think the Atlantic did get a lot of
pushback on that.
I think they did. And I think a lot of them are seeing that I don't know.
So maybe this article, or the framing of this article, was the death knell for the have it all.
From your mouth to God's ears, dear. Yeah. But to move on from it, the discrimination against women issues that we face now tend to be either more subtle or hidden from the elite women who have the ability to push back against them, and therefore harder to undo than the sort of just, I don't know if they're harder to undo, I withdraw that one, but hard to address than they were in the straight-on, head-butting, late 1960s, early 1970s, yes, women should be able to be lawyers. Not just get a law degree, but actually practice law.
Right.
It hits later, and it comes in subtle ways.
Well, we've had this discussion in our own profession. Something that Anne Friedman has done a lot to bring to the forefront of the discussion about what's called the byline gender gap in journalism. Right. So if you take that and I've all, before I became a journalist, I used to be a lawyer, and I really do feel like the law is seen as a profession that's very sexist. That there aren't as many women partners at law firms and so on and so forth. But I think that there's equal problems in that regard in journalism, in the sense that when I think it was Anne Friedman who had documented. It was somebody in the context of the VITA statistics that came out earlier this year about the byline gender gap. And someone had put all of this together with also just, who are the editors? And are the editor, and what are the editor's expectations for what a piece should look like?
And what matters.
Oh, it was, and also, the other piece I'm thinking of is Erica Fry's piece in the Columbia Journalism Review, documenting the byline gender gap on newspaper opinion pages.
Yes.
And then also it also documented the difference between how many women authored op-eds on economics or foreign policy or national security versus sort of these softer family life kind of issues.
Well, wait a minute. Are they softer? I mean, that's what I'm writing about. Is that softer?
Well, I think it depends on what it is. I mean,
life.
Yeah, I think it depends on the framing. I think it's a question of whether it's about because it can have a very strong research economics,
with things
economics policy component to it, and be about family life, or it can be a sort of fluffy, sort of. I mean, of course, I don't mean to denigrate those sort of pieces. People like them, people read them, they're fun, or interesting, or revealing about some people's lifestyle. I guess I'm just trying to make the point overall that, if you have male editors making decisions about what pitches get accepted, and then, they have sort of expectations or views of what constitutes something that's authoritative. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of, and I'm not saying that the, male editors are out to squeeze out women writers. I think that people come to this with a lot of unrecognized expectations or biases, or
preconscious bias. Right.
Yeah, and
yes,
so it's not necessarily that. It's not overt necessarily.
One thing I do want to add, I mean, I absolutely agree with you, and I think we've probably both written about this, or I certainly have at some length, that the unconscious bias that holds women back or moves men ahead. I don't know, did you see that piece that got a lot of attention among women briefly. The gamer, I don't remember, who said, "Look, dudes, here what it is. It's difficulty setting, right? If you're a white guy, you have the lowest difficulty, the easiest difficulty setting in advancing in your professional life. And if you're a black woman, you have the highest it's just going to be harder at every stage of the game. There will be more against you, and that's what it's like. It's like, are you going to play the game on easy? Or are you going to play the game on difficult? And most white men aren't aware of what the invisible barriers are that they don't face. So all that's true. I just want to say one thing about the byline gap. I just started with the op-ed project. Do you know Katie Orenstein's project there? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. She focuses on the fact that, yes, all the thought leader publications publish far fewer women than men. At the same time, it often tracks the submission rate. So the Washington Post did their study.
The never-ending discussion on this, like, do women pitch more?
Right. I'm not going to talk about a why, but that these are facts. These are also facts that they had something like 80% of their op-eds, or 90%, were by men in this 5-month period, and or 87% were by men, and 90% of their submissions were men. So whether women are socialized not to try, or whether they look at the page and say, that's not for me, it doesn't matter. But all these things have to change. Anyway, I'm working with the op-ed project and training women to pitch, and it is very interesting to look at to see some of the internalized barriers come up in those seminars. It's deep. Yeah. It's very deep. So we have to change, as well as asking the external world to change.
Right. But, both.
Nature, nurture, culture, all of the things have to happen at once.
Right.
Yes.
Well, I think that, if we did anything this morning, it was that we permanently buried the "can she have it all" frame, right?
I didn't even hear that phrase. I'm sure you didn't say it. It's gone.
I didn't. Gone.
Neutron bomb, it's evaporated. We'll never be heard again.
Thanks so much for talking about all of this with me.
This was a pleasure. Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks. Bye.